Sarah stood at the kitchen sink, furiously scrubbing the same plate for the third time, while lecturing Mike about proper dishwasher loading techniques, completely unaware that her husband had stopped listening and was staring longingly at the garage door. The Phoenix sun blazed through the kitchen window at 7:30 on this sweltering Tuesday morning, casting harsh shadows across domestic chaos. Baby bottles crowded the counter next to forgotten coffee cups, their contents growing cold. Cheerios scattered across the high chair where 6-month-old Emma had abandoned her breakfast. Dirty dishes formed precarious towers beside the sink, evidence of a household barely keeping pace with daily life. The suffocating tension between two people filled the air more oppressively than the desert heat outside. Sarah Collins, 29 and formerly a successful marketing manager, now wielded a dish sponge like a weapon of frustration. Her dark hair hung limp in the same messy ponytail she'd worn for 3 days running. Exhaustion painted purple circles under her eyes, and every movement carried the sharp efficiency of someone attempting to control chaos through sheer force of will. Mike Collins, 31 and normally articulate about software architecture, had learned to communicate primarily through nods, shrugs, and strategic silence. His shoulders curved inward as if protecting himself from incoming criticism, fingers drumming against his coffee mug with the restless energy of someone planning an escape route. Baby Emma, innocent of her role in her parents' unraveling, provided the soundtrack with her intermittent fussing. Sarah's voice cut through the morning air as she detailed Mike's dishwasher mistakes from the night before. She gestured emphatically with the dripping sponge, building to her daily catalog of his inadequacies. Cabinet doors left open, surfaces not wiped properly, his apparent inability to distinguish between recyclables and regular trash all received equal billing in her morning presentation. Mike's attention drifted toward the garage door, his eyes holding the distant look of someone who had learned to survive constant criticism by mentally removing himself from the conversation. "Mike, are you even listening to me?" Sarah's voice rose an octave. "I've been talking for 5 minutes about household management, and you're just sitting there like none of this matters to you." Mike attempted to share something about a challenging project at work, hoping to redirect their interaction toward neutral territory. He started explaining a complex coding problem that had kept him up late, his voice gaining enthusiasm as he described the solution he'd discovered. But Sarah interrupted before he finished his second sentence, pivoting to her frustration about him staying up late when Emma had been crying and she'd needed help. His accomplishment, his attempt to connect through sharing something meaningful from his day, disappeared beneath her avalanche of complaints about sleep schedules and parental responsibilities. When Emma began crying from her high chair, Mike moved to comfort his daughter, but Sarah swooped in with instructions about proper burping technique. As he reached for the baby, Sarah directed him on the correct angle for holding her, the appropriate pressure for patting her back, and the precise timing for switching positions. Mike's hands, which confidently navigated complex computer systems worth millions of dollars, apparently couldn't be trusted with his own child without constant supervision. He withdrew slowly, allowing Sarah to take over completely, his face carrying the defeated expression of someone who had stopped believing in his own competence. The morning routine continued with Sarah providing commentary on Mike's coffee preparation, his choice of breakfast, and his method of packing his work bag. Each observation carried the undertone of instruction, as if Mike were a slow student requiring guidance from a superior teacher. When he mentioned plans to grab lunch with a colleague, Sarah immediately suggested better food choices and more economical lunch strategies. Mike's responses grew shorter, reduced to monosyllabic acknowledgments demonstrating his gradual retreat. The breaking point arrived when Sarah paused in her dishwashing to deliver what felt like the 100th correction of the morning. The accumulated weight of constant critique and complete absence of acknowledgement for anything he did well finally pushed both past their limit. "Why don't you ever listen to me?" Sarah exploded, her voice cracking with exhaustion and desperation. "I'm drowning here, Mike." I haven't slept more than 2 hours straight in months, and you act like you don't even see what's happening in your own house." Mike set down his coffee mug with deliberate care, his movements precise and controlled. When he spoke, his voice carried a quiet devastation that stopped Sarah mid-breath. "Why don't you ever listen to me? I stopped trying to help because nothing I do is ever right. Every time I touch Emma, you correct me. Every time I clean something, you redo it. Every time I try to share something with you, you interrupt with another list of my failures." The truth hung in the air like smoke from a fire neither had noticed was burning. Sarah felt her anger drain away, replaced by hollow recognition that terrified her more than rage. She realized she couldn't remember the last time she had simply listened to Mike speak without planning her response or preparing her next criticism. She couldn't recall the last conversation where she had focused on what he was doing right, rather than cataloging his mistakes. Mike stood slowly, his chair scraping against the tile floor. Without another word, he gathered his work bag and headed for the garage, leaving behind his untouched coffee and the weight of unspoken truths. Sarah watched him go, understanding for the first time that the distance between them had nothing to do with physical space and everything to do with her inability to see him as anything other than another item on her list of things to manage and improve. As the garage door rumbled open and Mike's car pulled away, Sarah found herself alone in the kitchen with Emma, surrounded by the debris of another failed morning. She stared at Mike's abandoned coffee mug, still full and growing cold, realizing it had become a symbol of everything wrong between them. He no longer lingered over morning coffee because she had transformed those quiet moments into opportunities to review his inadequacies. From a relationship expert's perspective, Sarah's behavior revealed a devastating pattern that destroys marriages more effectively than outright conflict. By failing to listen genuinely, she had turned every conversation into a one-way street where Mike's thoughts and experiences held no value. Her chronic displeasure sent the message that nothing he did could ever satisfy her, creating a hopeless dynamic where his efforts felt pointless. Most damaging of all, her relentless focus on his weaknesses rather than his strengths had eroded his confidence and her attraction to him simultaneously. Men naturally withdraw when they feel incompetent and unheard, creating the exact outcome Sarah feared most but had unknowingly orchestrated. That night, Mike slept in the guest room for the third time that week, and Sarah lay awake in their empty bed recognizing that their conversations had devolved into her monologues of dissatisfaction. She stared at the ceiling, finally understanding that she had stopped being his wife and started being his supervisor, and the man she had fallen in love with was disappearing a little more each day. At Romano's Italian bistro, Sarah carried the burden of appearing perfect while secretly falling apart, never showing Mike her vulnerability or trusting him to handle anything important. The Saturday evening crowd at Romano's buzzed with families enjoying dinner together. Sarah watched a woman at the next table laugh freely while her husband effortlessly soothed their fussy toddler, and jealousy twisted in her stomach. The warm lighting cast a golden glow over red checkered tablecloths, creating rustic charm that felt at odds with the storm brewing inside her chest. She gripped her water glass tighter, determined to project the image of a woman who had everything under control even as her world crumbled beneath her feet. Sarah sat across from Mike, their 8-month-old daughter Emma perched in a high chair between them like a tiny referee in their ongoing marital standoff. Sarah had carefully applied makeup to hide the exhaustion lines and chosen her outfit with military precision, needing to prove she remained capable and composed despite the chaos at home. Her smile felt painted on, brittle as old wallpaper. Mike seemed relaxed for the first time in weeks, actually engaging with Emma by making silly faces that drew giggles from their daughter. But Sarah couldn't appreciate this rare moment because she was too busy scanning for potential problems and preparing contingency plans for every possible scenario. The trouble began when Emma's diaper reached critical capacity during their main course. Sarah felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders like a lead blanket, automatically assuming this was her problem to solve. Mike was telling her about a coworker's amusing mishap, actually smiling for the first time in days. But Sarah wasn't listening because her mind had moved to crisis management mode. She could ask Mike to handle the diaper change, but that would require admitting she needed help, something her pride had trained her to avoid. Besides, he would probably do it wrong somehow, and she would end up dealing with a bigger mess later. Without explanation, Sarah scooped up Emma and the diaper bag, announcing she would be right back. She marched toward the women's restroom with grim determination, leaving Mike alone at their table with a look of confused concern. Sarah told herself this efficiency was a virtue, that handling things herself was faster than involving Mike in what was, after all, a straightforward task. The women's restroom at Romano's had been designed by someone who clearly never changed a diaper. The changing station hung broken and askew, secured to the wall with a single functioning bolt. Sarah stared at the contraption, her confidence beginning to crack. Other women moved in and out, offering sympathetic glances but no practical solutions. Sarah found herself in a bathroom stall. Emma balanced on her hip while she attempted to create a sanitary changing surface on the narrow counter beside the sink. The diaper bag contents scattered as Sarah juggled her squirming daughter and tried to maintain hygiene in less than ideal circumstances. Emma sensed her mother's stress and began crying with increasing intensity, her wails echoing off the tile walls. Sarah's carefully applied makeup began to smudge as perspiration beaded on her forehead, and her composed facade started cracking. The diaper change became an exercise in frustration. Emma refused to lie still, arching her back and kicking in protest. Sarah struggled to maintain her grip while simultaneously cleaning, applying fresh diaper, and preventing Emma from rolling off the narrow counter. The process that normally took 2 minutes at home stretched into an ordeal, with Sarah growing more frazzled by the moment. By the time she finished, her shirt bore suspicious stains, her hair had escaped its careful styling, and her nerves were shot. When Sarah finally returned to their table, Mike looked up with genuine concern, setting down his fork and giving her his full attention for the first time in weeks. This was her moment to be vulnerable, to admit that she had struggled and needed support. Instead, she launched into detailed criticism of the restaurant's facilities, complaining about the broken changing station, the lack of adequate space, and the general inconsideration of establishment owners who claimed to be family-friendly. Mike listened with growing confusion, clearly wanting to help but unsure how to respond to her litany of complaints about things beyond anyone's control. When she finished, he made the mistake of offering a practical observation. "You changed her on the bathroom counter? That seems pretty unsanitary, Sarah. Why didn't you just come get me? I could have taken her to the men's room, or we could have figured something else out." The suggestion that she had handled the situation incorrectly struck Sarah like a physical blow. Instead of acknowledging his point, or admitting she had been too proud to ask for help, she immediately went on the defensive. Her voice rose as she explained in excruciating detail exactly why his suggestions wouldn't have worked, how the men's room probably didn't have a changing station either, and how asking staff for assistance would have been more embarrassing than her improvised solution. Mike's face closed off as Sarah's defensive explanations escalated into accusations about his lack of understanding. He had offered genuine concern and practical suggestions, only to find himself under attack for caring enough to comment. The brief moment of connection they had shared earlier evaporated completely, replaced by the familiar dynamic of Sarah's grievances and Mike's withdrawal. Other diners began glancing in their direction, as Sarah's voice carried across the restaurant. The remainder of their meal passed in uncomfortable silence, punctuated only by Emma's occasional babbling. Mike ate mechanically, his earlier relaxation completely gone, while Sarah picked at her food and replayed the bathroom incident with growing mortification. She realized she had turned what could have been a moment of connection into another opportunity for conflict, but her pride prevented her from acknowledging her mistake. During the drive home, Emma slept peacefully in her car seat, unaware of the tension radiating from her parents. Sarah stared out the passenger window at the Scottsdale streetlights, her reflection ghost-like in the glass, and wondered when she had become someone who couldn't accept help or admit weakness. She remembered a time when Mike had been her first choice for support during difficult moments, when she had trusted his problem-solving abilities and valued his perspective. Now she automatically assumed he would be either unavailable or inadequate, creating the very dynamic she claimed to resent. Mike drove with careful attention to the road, his hands gripping the steering wheel with familiar tension. Sarah wanted to apologize, to explain that her defensive reaction had nothing to do with him, and everything to do with her own fear of appearing incompetent, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she mentally rehearsed justifications for her behavior and prepared arguments for the discussion that would inevitably follow once they got home. From a relationship expert's perspective, Sarah's behavior revealed 3 critical patterns that poison marital intimacy. Her inability to show vulnerability prevented the very connection she craved, because men are naturally drawn to protect and support women who allow themselves to be human rather than perfect. Her automatic assumption that Mike would be unhelpful had become a self-fulfilling prophecy that trained him to stay uninvolved rather than risk criticism. Most destructively, her compulsive need to explain and defend every decision escalated minor moments into major conflicts, teaching Mike that offering concern would be met with attack rather than appreciation. As they pulled into their driveway, Sarah noticed Mike's coffee mug from that morning still sitting on the kitchen counter through the window, cold and forgotten like so many of their recent attempts at connection. She realized with dawning horror that she had become someone who pushed away the very help she desperately needed, and Mike had learned to stop offering what she seemed determined to reject. Dr. Newman's office became a battleground where Sarah listed Mike's failures with prosecutorial precision, never once mentioning what she appreciated about him, or remembering the woman he fell in love with. The beige walls of Dr. Patricia Newman's counseling office were decorated with artificial plants and inspirational posters featuring sunsets and motivational quotes. The space felt as sterile and lifeless as Sarah's marriage had become, all neutral colors and carefully arranged furniture designed to project calm while hosting the most turbulent moments of people's lives. The air smelled faintly of vanilla candles and false hope, and after 3 sessions, Sarah knew this expensive exercise in guided conversation was nothing more than an elaborate way to argue with a referee. Dr. Patricia Newman, a woman in her 50s with graying hair pulled back in a sensible bun, maintained the professional demeanor of someone who had heard every marital complaint imaginable. She wore reading glasses that she adjusted frequently when taking notes, and her voice carried the measured cadence of someone trained to remain neutral, even when watching relationships implode. Her degrees hung in neat frames behind her desk, credentials that should have inspired confidence, but instead felt like expensive decorations in a room where nothing meaningful seemed to happen. Sarah sat rigidly in her designated chair, a mental filing cabinet of grievances organized and ready for presentation. She arrived at each session with detailed examples of Mike's inadequacies, his failures as a husband and father, his apparent inability to understand or support her needs. Her voice took on the tone of a prosecutor building a case, each incident carefully catalogued as evidence of his fundamental unsuitability as a partner. She spoke about his failure to help with household chores, his emotional unavailability, his tendency to withdraw rather than engage. Never once did she mention anything positive about the man sitting across from her, the father of her child, the person she had once chosen to spend her life with. Mike sat slumped in his chair like a defendant awaiting sentencing, his shoulders curved inward in the protective posture that had become his default position. With each session, he seemed to shrink further into himself, his responses growing shorter as Sarah's litany of complaints continued. His eyes held the defeated expression of someone who had stopped believing in his own worth, someone who had internalized the message that everything wrong in their relationship stemmed from his personal failures. The real issue wasn't about communication techniques or household management, though those topics dominated their sessions. The problem was Sarah's complete inability to see anything positive in Mike, combined with her transformation from the warm, feminine woman he had married into someone he barely recognized. She had become critical where she once was accepting, controlling where she once was trusting, harsh where she once was soft. Session after session followed the same pattern. Dr. Newman would ask about their week, and Sarah would launch into detailed accounts of Mike's latest failures. She described his inadequate attempts to help with Emma, his failure to anticipate her needs, his inability to complete household tasks to her standards. Mike would sit silently, occasionally offering weak explanations that Sarah would immediately counter with additional examples of his incompetence. During their fourth session, Dr. Newman attempted to shift the dynamic. "Sarah," she said, adjusting her glasses, "I wonder if we might try focusing on what Mike does well rather than what you feel he's not doing. Sometimes couples get stuck in negative patterns where they only notice problems." Sarah's response was swift and dismissive. "What am I supposed to thank him for? Not helping? Sleeping through Emma's crying? Leaving me to handle everything while he disappears into his workshop?" Her voice carried the sharp edge of someone who viewed gratitude as surrender. "I need actual help, not empty appreciation for the bare minimum." Dr. Newman pressed gently. "What about when you first met? What attracted you to Mike? What qualities made you fall in love with him?" Sarah struggled to answer, realizing she could barely remember the woman she had been when they met. That version of herself seemed like a stranger. Someone who laughed easily and found joy in small moments. Someone who made Mike feel confident and capable rather than inadequate and defeated. The sessions continued with Mike growing increasingly silent, while Sarah's complaints grew more elaborate. She kept mental scorecards of his contributions versus hers, always finding him lacking. She dissected his motivations, questioned his priorities, and analyzed his failures with forensic thoroughness. What she never did was express genuine appreciation for anything he brought to their relationship. The breaking point came during their sixth session, when Dr. Newman asked Mike directly about his experience in the marriage. For months, he had sat quietly while Sarah presented her case against him, but something in the counselor's direct question unleashed the frustration he had been holding inside. "I can't do anything right in her eyes." Mike's voice cracked with emotion as words poured out like water through a broken dam. "She never notices the good things I do, only what I'm not doing perfectly. I work 50 hours a week to support our family. I love my daughter more than life itself. And I try every day to make Sarah happy. But nothing is ever enough. I feel like I'm failing at being a husband and father every single day, and she's the one telling me I'm failing." The raw pain in his voice stopped Sarah cold. For the first time in months, she saw Mike not as an adversary to be defeated, but as a human being who was suffering. She realized she honestly couldn't remember the last time she had thanked him for anything, acknowledged his efforts, or treated him like a partner rather than an employee she was perpetually disappointed with. "When did I become this critical, harsh person?" Sarah thought to herself as Mike's words echoed in the small office. "He used to say I lit up every room I entered. Now I feel like I suck the life out of every conversation we have." The woman Mike had fallen in love with seemed to have disappeared entirely, replaced by someone she didn't recognize and wasn't sure she liked. The realization that gratitude had completely disappeared from their relationship hit Sarah like a physical blow. Mike worked long hours to provide for their family, came home every evening, helped with Emma when asked, and never criticized Sarah the way she constantly criticized him. Yet she had trained herself to see only what he wasn't doing rather than appreciating what he was doing. From a relationship expert's perspective, Sarah's behavior revealed the devastating impact of withholding appreciation from a marriage. Gratitude functions like oxygen to a man's soul, and without it, even the strongest men begin to wither and withdraw. Sarah had also completely lost touch with her feminine essence, becoming masculine in her approach through control, criticism, and competition rather than embracing the receptive, inspiring energy that had originally made her irresistible to Mike. Dr. Newman suggested they take a break from counseling, recognizing that their current approach wasn't producing positive results. Sometimes couples need time to reflect individually before they can work together effectively, she explained, though Sarah suspected this was code for acknowledging that their sessions had become counterproductive. As they walked to their separate cars in the parking lot, Sarah felt more hopeless than ever. If professional help couldn't save their marriage, what could? But somewhere in the artificial calm of Dr. Newman's office, a seed of awareness had been planted about her own role in their marital dynamic, though it would take time for that realization to grow into genuine change. At home that evening, Sarah noticed Mike's coffee mug sitting unwashed in the kitchen sink, abandoned like so many of their attempts at connection. Even their shared morning ritual had died. Another casualty of her transformation from loving wife to harsh critic. She stared at the lonely mug and wondered if there was any way back to the woman she used to be, and the marriage they had once shared. The voice on the audiobook said, "What if your strength as a woman isn't in giving advice, but in receiving love?" And Sarah pulled into a Target parking lot because she needed to hear that again. The asphalt shimmered under the brutal Arizona sun as Sarah sat in her Honda Pilot in the crowded Target parking lot in Tempe, the air conditioning fighting against the heat. Soccer moms pushed carts while college students hurried past, everyone moving with purpose except Sarah, who had been driving aimlessly since leaving Emma with her mother. The audiobook had started playing automatically when her phone connected to the car's Bluetooth, and now she found herself riveted by words that seemed to speak directly to her failing marriage. The expert's voice filled the car with revolutionary ideas that contradicted everything Sarah thought she knew about relationships. Modern women have been taught that equality means sameness, the narrator explained. But what if true power comes from embracing our differences rather than erasing them? Sarah gripped the steering wheel tighter as concepts that challenged her deepest beliefs about marriage and feminism poured through the speakers. Sarah had always prided herself on being strong, independent, capable of handling anything. She had climbed the corporate ladder, managed complex marketing campaigns, and negotiated major deals. The idea that her approach to marriage might be fundamentally flawed felt like discovering she had been reading a map upside down for years. The conflict raging in Sarah's mind centered on everything she had been taught about modern relationships. Equality meant pulling your own weight, contributing 50%, never being dependent on a man. She had approached marriage like a business partnership, keeping score of contributions and demanding accountability. The audiobook suggested a radically different approach that made her feminist sensibilities recoil even as her heart recognized the truth. As the expert explained feminine receptivity, Sarah began seeing her marriage through a different lens. Every time Mike had tried to help her, she had immediately taken over and corrected his approach. When he brought flowers early in their relationship, she had critiqued his choice or worried about the expense. When he offered to cook dinner, she hovered in the kitchen providing instructions until he gave up. She had trained him, systematically and thoroughly, that his efforts were inadequate and unwelcome. The narrator explained how receiving gracefully encouraged men to give more, while rejecting their offerings taught them to stop trying. When a woman receives a man's help, his gifts, his compliments with genuine appreciation, she sends the message that he has something valuable to offer. This inspires him to look for more ways to contribute. Sarah felt sick recognition as she realized she had been doing the exact opposite for years. The discussion of feminine energy as joy and lightness struck even deeper. Sarah couldn't remember the last time she had laughed freely or approached problems with fun. She had become the family manager, the efficiency expert who sucked spontaneity out of every situation. The woman Mike had fallen in love with used to dance in the kitchen while cooking, used to find humor in small disasters, used to make ordinary moments feel special just by being present and joyful. Sarah found herself transported back to their early dating days. She remembered how Mike's face would light up when she laughed at his jokes, how he would go out of his way to surprise her with small gestures, how he seemed to draw energy from making her happy. That version of herself had been naturally receptive, appreciative of his efforts, and genuinely fun to be around. She had inspired his masculine desire to protect and provide simply by being herself. The revelation hit her when the expert talked about seduction versus pursuit. Feminine seduction isn't about sexual manipulation. It's about invitation rather than aggression, about inspiring a man's desire to pursue you rather than chasing after him. When a woman embraces her feminine power, she becomes magnetic rather than demanding. Sarah realized she had been approaching intimacy like everything else, taking charge, making demands, trying to control outcomes instead of creating conditions for Mike to want to pursue her. She thought about their recent attempts at physical intimacy, how she had become the initiator, the scheduler, the one who decided when and how things would happen. Mike had gradually become more passive, less interested, and she had interpreted this as rejection rather than recognizing her own role in killing the dynamic that had once made their relationship electric. She had been trying to be the man in the relationship instead of being the woman who inspired the man. "I've been trying to be his equal by being just like him," Sarah whispered to herself. "Controlling and giving and managing everything. But what if my power is in receiving and inspiring? What if that's what makes me irresistible?" The thought felt both terrifying and liberating, challenging everything she thought she knew about strength while offering a path back to the connection she desperately craved. The expert's explanation of polarity in relationships resonated with buried memories. Masculine energy thrived on providing, protecting, and solving problems, while feminine energy flourished through receiving, inspiring, and creating joy. When both partners tried to be masculine, they created competition rather than complement, conflict rather than chemistry. Sarah realized she had been fighting her own nature, trying to be strong in ways that actually weakened her power as a woman. Sarah made a decision that would change everything. Instead of trying to manage Mike into being the husband she thought she needed, she would experiment with being the wife who inspired him to want to step up. Instead of criticizing his efforts, she would receive them with gratitude. Instead of controlling every outcome, she would trust him to handle things his way. Instead of being the grim taskmaster of their household, she would rediscover the joy that had once made her irresistible to him. From a relationship expert's perspective, Sarah's breakthrough represented the beginning of understanding how feminine energy actually works in relationships. Receptivity creates space for masculine giving to flourish, while rejection kills the desire to contribute. Joy and lightness naturally attract masculine energy, while criticism and heaviness repel it. Feminine seduction through invitation and inspiration creates the polarity that generates lasting attraction, while feminine aggression destroys the very dynamic it seeks to create. As Sarah finally put the car in drive and headed home, she felt like she was seeing her marriage for the first time with clear vision. The problems hadn't disappeared, but her understanding of her role in creating and potentially solving them had fundamentally shifted. She was no longer the victim of Mike's inadequacies, but a powerful participant in shaping the dynamic between them. That evening, when Mike came home from work looking exhausted and defeated, Sarah did something she hadn't done in months. Instead of greeting him with a list of tasks or complaints about her day, she walked over and gave him a genuine hug. Not the perfunctory embrace of roommates, but the kind of hug that communicated, "I'm glad you're home," without words. She followed it with a spontaneous back rub, her hands working the tension from his shoulders while she asked about his day and actually listened to his answer. Mike's response was immediate and unmistakable. His body relaxed under her touch. His voice warmed as he described his afternoon, and for the first time in months, he lingered in the kitchen instead of disappearing into his workshop. When he finished telling her about a frustrating meeting, instead of offering advice or criticism, Sarah simply said, "That sounds really challenging. I'm proud of how you handled it." The shift in energy was palpable. Mike looked at her with something she hadn't seen in his eyes for months. Genuine appreciation and a hint of the attraction that had once defined their relationship. As they moved through their evening routine, Sarah noticed small changes. He offered to help with Emma's bath time. He complimented the dinner she had prepared. He actually made eye contact when they spoke, instead of looking through her like she was invisible. Later that night, as Sarah cleaned up the kitchen, she found Mike's coffee mug sitting on the counter next to the sink, rather than abandoned wherever he had finished drinking. It was a small gesture, but Sarah recognized it as significant. For the first time in weeks, he was re-engaging with their shared space, taking small steps back toward partnership instead of retreat. The lonely coffee mug that had symbolized their disconnection was beginning to represent hope for reconnection instead. 6 months later, Sarah lounged on the couch painting her nails while Mike happily changed Emma's diaper, and she marveled at how 11 simple changes had transformed their entire marriage. The same Phoenix home that had once felt like a battlefield now radiated warmth and harmony. Morning sunlight streamed through clean windows, casting golden rectangles across hardwood floors, where Emma's toys were scattered in organized chaos rather than desperate disorder. The kitchen counters gleamed without the desperate edge of someone trying to control an uncontrollable situation, and the air itself seemed lighter, filled with Mike's gentle murmur as he talked to their now 14-month-old daughter while changing her diaper. Sarah Collins, now 30 and glowing with confidence, stretched languidly on the sofa as she applied coral nail polish. Her hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, and she wore a flowing sundress that made her feel beautifully feminine rather than like the exhausted manager she had become during those dark months. The transformation wasn't just about cleanliness or organization. It was about the fundamental shift in energy between two people who had remembered how to love each other well. Mike moved with the easy confidence of a man who felt valued in his own home. His shoulders no longer curved inward defensively, and his face carried the relaxed expression of someone who woke up eager to see what the day would bring. As he lifted Emma into the air, making her giggle, he caught Sarah's eye and winked, a gesture loaded with the affection and playfulness that had once defined their relationship. Emma thrived in the atmosphere of her parents' renewed partnership, her personality blossoming as she absorbed the security that comes from witnessing healthy love. She babbled constantly now, pointing at everything with curious fingers, and her laughter filled the house with joy that reminds adults why they wanted children in the first place. The occasional temptation to revert to old patterns still whispered in Sarah's ear. When Mike loaded the dishwasher differently than she preferred, her first instinct was to rearrange the plates and offer instructions. But she had learned to recognize these impulses as echoes of the controlling woman she no longer wanted to be, and she consciously chose to step back and trust Mike to handle things his own way. 3 weeks earlier, Sarah had felt overwhelmed by a complex work project requiring research skills she didn't possess. In the past, she would have suffered in silence, determined to prove her competence by figuring everything out herself. Instead, she had curled up next to Mike on the couch and admitted her vulnerability. "I'm feeling really overwhelmed by this project," she had confessed, her voice soft with the kind of honesty that invites protection. "I don't even know where to start with the research component." Mike's response had been immediate and enthusiastic. He had set aside his laptop and spent the next hour helping her break down the project into manageable pieces. offering to handle the research portion entirely so she could focus on the creative elements that played to her strengths. His eagerness to contribute, to be useful, to solve a problem for his wife had been so genuine that Sarah felt foolish for all the years she had robbed him of the opportunity to help. The art of listening had become Sarah's secret weapon for creating intimacy. When Mike came home stressed about difficult clients or frustrated with office politics, Sarah resisted every urge to offer solutions. Instead, she would pour him a beer, settle into her favorite chair, and simply listen with focused attention that communicated her complete presence. "That sounds really challenging," she would say, giving him permission to explore his thoughts without judgment. Last Tuesday, Mike had talked for nearly 20 minutes about a software integration problem, and Sarah had contributed nothing but encouraging murmurs and genuine interest. By the end, Mike's shoulders had relaxed, his expression had cleared, and he had thanked her for helping him think through the problem even though she hadn't offered a single suggestion. The power of being heard, truly heard, had solved his stress more effectively than any advice she could have given. Their shopping trip to Scottsdale Fashion Square had become family legend. Sarah had been admiring delicate silver earrings in a jewelry store window, not hinting or manipulating, just genuine appreciation for something beautiful. "Those are gorgeous," she had mentioned casually to Mike, who was entertaining Emma while Sarah browsed. She expected nothing more than his agreement, but Mike had filed the information away with the attention of a man who had rediscovered the joy of making his wife happy. 3 days later, Mike had arrived home with a small wrapped box and the expression of someone who couldn't contain his excitement. "I couldn't wait until your birthday," he had announced, practically bouncing as Sarah unwrapped the exact earrings she had admired. The look of pure delight on her face when she opened the box had made Mike beam with the pride of a man who had successfully pleased the woman he loved. The scene in their kitchen that evening had perfectly captured the transformation in their relationship dynamic. Sarah had been cooking dinner while dancing to music from her phone, her hips swaying as she stirred pasta sauce. The joy radiating from her movements had been irresistible to Mike, who had appeared behind her and pulled her into an impromptu slow dance between the stove and refrigerator. Instead of protesting about dinner getting cold, Sarah had melted into his arms and followed his lead, allowing herself to be swept away by the romance of the moment. When Mike had fixed the broken cabinet door that had been hanging crooked for weeks, Sarah's response had been a masterclass in building up rather than tearing down. Instead of critiquing his methods or pointing out small imperfections, she had focused on his competence. "You're so handy," she had told him, running her fingers along the smooth door. "I love watching you fix things." The pride in Mike's expression had been worth more than a perfectly aligned cabinet door, and within days he had started looking for other repair projects around the house. Sarah had also rediscovered the joy of embracing her femininity without apology. She had started wearing dresses again, not because Mike demanded it, but because flowing fabrics made her feel graceful and beautiful. She painted her nails in bright colors, wore perfume to the grocery store, and took pleasure in small rituals that celebrated her identity as a woman. When Mike opened doors for her or carried heavy bags, she received his gestures with genuine appreciation rather than feminist indignation, understanding that his desire to protect and provide was a gift to be treasured. The revelation that had transformed everything was surprisingly simple. She didn't need to change Mike to have the marriage she wanted. She needed to change herself. When she embraced being a woman in the fullest sense, Mike naturally stepped into being the man she had always needed him to be. Their relationship had found its natural polarity, with Sarah's receptive, inspiring energy drawing out Mike's protective, providing instincts in an endless cycle of mutual satisfaction. From a relationship expert's perspective, Sarah and Mike's transformation demonstrated the power of working with natural masculine and feminine energies rather than against them. When women embrace vulnerability, receptivity, and joy, they create space for men to express their deepest desires to protect, provide, and pursue. This polarity generates the attraction and partnership that sustains lasting love, not because one partner is superior to the other, but because their differences complement and strengthen each other. The morning of Sarah's 30th birthday had begun like any other, with Mike bringing her coffee in bed and Emma crawling around their bedroom babbling happily. But as the day unfolded, Mike revealed surprise after surprise with the enthusiasm of someone who had rediscovered the art of romance. First came the Disneyland tickets, 3 annual passes that represented his understanding of Sarah's desire for family adventures. Then came the small wrapped box that contained a delicate tiara, which he placed on her head with ceremonial seriousness. "Every princess needs a crown," Mike had announced, stepping back to admire his handiwork. But as Sarah looked at herself in the bedroom mirror, she realized she wasn't playing dress-up or pretending to be something she wasn't. The tiara represented the feminine power she had reclaimed, the ability to inspire and receive and create joy that made her truly irresistible to the man who loved her. She was a queen in her own home, not because she controlled everything, but because she had learned to trust and receive and celebrate the partnership they had built together. The kitchen counter now hosted 2 coffee mugs every morning, sitting side by side like old friends who had found their way back to each other after a long separation. Mike lingered over breakfast again, sharing his thoughts about the day ahead and listening to Sarah's plans with the attention of someone who genuinely cared about her world. The man who had once bolted from the kitchen to escape her criticism now sought out her company, drawn by the light and warmth she radiated when she remembered who she really was. As Sarah watched Mike chase Emma around the backyard that evening, both of them laughing as sprinklers created rainbows in the Arizona sunset, she felt the deep satisfaction of a woman who had discovered the secret to lasting love. It wasn't about being perfect or having all the answers or managing every detail of their shared life. It was about being authentically, powerfully, irresistibly herself, and trusting that the man she had chosen to love would rise to meet her there.